While fans prepare for Caitlin Clark's highly anticipated home debut at Gainbridge Fieldhouse, a far bigger battle may already be taking place behind closed doors inside the Indiana Fever organization, and time could be running out for 91-year-old Herb Simon. Long before the opening tip ever arrives, the real power shift may have already started, not because of another team, but because of a billionaire quietly positioned in the shadows with the potential to one day take complete control of the franchise. His name is Steven Ralls, a figure many Fever fans barely know because he has deliberately stayed away from the spotlight, never sitting courtside, never giving interviews, and remaining almost completely invisible even while the Pacers were making their Eastern Conference Finals run and the Fever dominated national headlines during Media Day. But behind the scenes, everything changed in December 2023 when Ralls quietly expanded his ownership stake by purchasing an additional 15% of the franchise to add to the 5% he already held, bringing his total share to a massive 20%. At the time, Sportico valued the franchise at an astonishing $3.47 billion, meaning Ralls invested more than $525 million in a move that somehow escaped major national attention. Hidden deep within that agreement was the detail that now changes everything, a clause outlining a possible pathway to full franchise control if the Simon family ever decides to step away. And once you fully understand what that deal truly means, the future of the entire organization suddenly begins to look completely different. The rise of the Indiana Fever over the past 2 seasons has been nothing short of shocking, transforming the franchise from an overlooked organization into one of the most valuable properties in professional sports almost overnight. In 2024, the same year Caitlin Clark entered the league, the Fever were valued at just $90 million, but in only a single year that number exploded to $370 million before climbing again to an incredible $560 million. That massive 522% surge in value has turned the Fever into the fastest-growing women's sports franchise in the world and already one of the most valuable teams in the entire WNBA, trailing only Golden State and the New York Liberty. What makes the situation even more significant is the fact that the franchise operates under the same Pacers sports and entertainment umbrella, where billionaire Steven Ralls already holds a powerful 20% ownership stake. The same investor, who quietly spent more than $500 million buying into the Pacers organization, is now directly tied to a Fever franchise whose value is skyrocketing at a historic pace, and according to the agreement attached to that investment, he would receive the first opportunity to take control if ownership ever changes in the future. Everyone knows Caitlin Clark changed the direction of this franchise the moment she arrived, but this unbelievable jump from $90 million to $560 million was not built through advertising campaigns, expansion money, or years of executive planning. It happened because number 22 stepped onto the court, sold out arenas across the country, fought through injuries under the national spotlight, and became the face of women's basketball while preparing for another major showdown against Paige Bueckers and the Dallas Wings on national television. What is unfolding in Indiana feels like a franchise standing at the intersection of legacy, money, and uncertainty, where Caitlin Clark may have transformed the Fever into a financial powerhouse, yet never had any control over who could eventually hold the real authority behind the scenes. In professional sports, emotional narratives don't build championship dynasties. Ownership structure and financial control do. And those foundations are shaped far away from the spotlight by the people signing the checks long after players and coaches come and go, which is exactly why the situation in Indiana is starting to raise deeper questions. Herb Simon, who turned 91 last November, remains the longest-tenured owner in the NBA after purchasing the Pacers with his late brother Mel back in 1983 for just $11 million. And today that same family stake is reportedly valued at more than $3.5 billion. His son Steve Simon, based in the San Francisco area, currently serves as alternate governor, and for years it has been publicly assumed that he would naturally inherit full control of the organization when the time comes. However, the agreement tied to the franchise introduces a far less straightforward reality, because instead of guaranteeing a direct family succession, the language specifically references if the Simon family ever chooses to sell, a clause that quietly opens 2 very different outcomes for the future of the Pacers and Fever. In one path, Steve Simon steps in as expected and maintains family control, but in the other, billionaire Steven Rowles becomes the figure positioned to assume far greater authority, a possibility that reframes every major financial decision the franchise has made in recent months, including Aaliyah Boston's 4-year, $6.3 million extension, the largest total contract in WNBA history, and Kelsey Mitchell's $1.4 million Supermax deal under the new collective bargaining agreement. The return of Sophie Cunningham, the re-signing of Lexi Hull, the arrival of Monique Billings on a 2-year deal from Golden State, and the late 2024 decision to bring in Stephanie White from Connecticut to lead the roster all point towards something larger than routine off-season activity. Because none of these moves appear to have been made in isolation or without long-term structural intent shaping the direction of the franchise. Instead, they form part of a broader pattern of roster construction that has unfolded while Steven Rowles quietly maintains a 20% ownership stake and watches the organization's value surge from the background, turning what once looked like a standard ownership setup under Herb Simon into a far more complex power structure defined by influence, timing, and future leverage. The figure who could eventually inherit or assume control of the franchise has never been publicly positioned as a central voice, never placed at the forefront of the team's identity, and never actively presented to fans. Yet his presence has consistently existed behind every major decision, raising questions about how much control already sits outside the visible leadership. Steven Rowles, now 75 years old and born in Bethesda, Maryland, is not traditionally tied to Indiana basketball culture, though his connection to the state traces back to his time at DePauw University in Greencastle. In 1984, he co-founded Danaher Corporation with his brother Mitchell, building a global industrial and life sciences empire that now generates nearly $24 billion annually across sectors, including medical diagnostics, water quality systems, voting technology, and biotechnology, with one of its subsidiaries, Beckman Coulter Life Sciences, based in Indianapolis and reportedly serving as an early link between Rowles and Herb Simon. Beyond his corporate empire, he also owns the film studio Indian Paintbrush, known for producing multiple Wes Anderson projects and acquiring the Criterion Collection, and with a Forbes estimated net worth of around $8.9 billion, he stands among the most financially powerful individuals connected to professional basketball, making the real question not just who Steven Rowles is, but how the quiet accumulation of influence, ownership structure, and strategic positioning could ultimately reshape the future control of the Indiana Fever. Unlike owners who seek visibility and public recognition, Steven Rowles has built his entire reputation on operating in silence, steadily positioning himself inside undervalued institutions and waiting with calculated patience for opportunities that most people don't see coming, a pattern that has defined his moves across businesses such as Equity Group Holdings, Danaher, Colfax, and even the Criterion Collection, where influence is accumulated quietly rather than announced loudly. That same approach now casts a long shadow over the Indiana Pacers and Fever situation, where what appears on the surface as routine ownership is increasingly being viewed through a different lens by those tracking long-term control and financial positioning. In 2023, the Pacers carried an estimated valuation of around $3.47 billion, while today that figure has reportedly surged closer to $4.76 billion, and in parallel, the Fever have experienced an even more dramatic rise, jumping from just $90 million in 2024 to approximately $560 million now, driven by unprecedented attention and on-court transformation. Within that growth story, Steven Rowles did not step in as a flashy investor or public-facing figure, but instead secured what many consider a strategically significant position, gaining influence and a contractual advantage that could place him at the center of future ownership decisions if the Simon family ever opts to sell. That clause, granting first consideration, is now viewed as a critical piece of the puzzle, especially given how rapidly valuations and league dynamics are shifting, and history in professional sports has already shown how quickly control can change hands, as seen when longtime Detroit Pistons owner Bill Davidson, who had owned the team since 1974 and guided them to 3 NBA championships, passed away in 2009 at the age of 86, leaving ownership to his widow Karen Davidson, who ultimately did not intend to remain in charge long-term. In June 2011, just 2 years after the passing of Bill Davidson, The Detroit Pistons were sold to Tom Gores for $325 million, a deal that stunned the market at the time, especially since Forbes had recently valued the franchise closer to $360 million, while rival interest linked to Mike Ilitch was reportedly prepared to exceed $400 million before talks collapsed, with Crane's Detroit business later calling it a bargain sale once the leverage of long-term ownership disappeared and the family lost its dominant negotiating position. Unlike that scenario, the current Indiana situation is far more layered because Bill Davidson never had a deep-pocketed minority partner already embedded within the organization with a structured contractual pathway toward future control, a factor that now completely reshapes how the Pacers and Fever ownership story is being viewed. As Caitlin Clark prepares to step onto the floor at Gainbridge Fieldhouse for the season opener against the Dallas Wings, the game itself represents only the visible surface of a much larger and more complex reality unfolding behind the scenes, where the franchise's explosive rise has created an entirely separate storyline driven by ownership, valuation, and long-term control. Herb Simon, now 91, continues to push for one more championship window while still in charge, a mindset that has helped fuel aggressive roster construction around Clark. But at the same time, Stephen Rowles remains quietly positioned in the background with a contractual advantage tied to the 2023 agreement that could one day place him at the center of ownership decisions if the Simon family ever decides to sell. Steve Simon is still widely viewed as the natural successor within the family structure, yet in modern sports ownership, expectations alone do not always determine outcomes when financial leverage and legal positioning are already in play. And as all of this develops, Caitlin Clark stands at the center of it all, carrying a franchise whose value has skyrocketed, returning from injury, stepping into growing national spotlight, and trying to lead Indiana toward contention while the long-term future of the organization continues to unfold behind closed doors in ways most fans will never fully see during a single night of basketball. If you want more deep dive breakdowns like this, make sure to like and subscribe for more updates.